Absolutely.
Well, let's kind of dive in here. Before we get to the 1796 invasion, I kind of want to talk about briefly the history or the idea of invading Ireland and England. The last time it was successfully done was 1066 by William the Conqueror. Why is this such a difficult task for the rest of Europe to attempt?
I think the most straightforward answer, it is very difficult to organize a seaborne invasion of another country. The English Channel is not a very wide channel. At times you can see across from England to France and vice versa, but the currents and the navigation make it very difficult at times, and also makes it easy to defend. A fleet can sail out of Portsmouth and intercept an invasion force going across quite often, and you've seen the most famous examples of that being the Spanish Armada, where obviously a huge invasion force arrives and the wind and the storms scatter it, combined with the English Navy. So it's always a difficult challenge for any would-be general to attempt.
Yeah, I mean, famously, Napoleon couldn't do it. Hitler couldn't do it. And we're only talking about like 25 miles stretch of sea, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So I think again it shows the British naval superiority, maybe not supremacy yet. That won't come to pass just yet. But still, it did make it very difficult, especially because for much of the wars, Britain operated a fairly successful blockade of the French ports, except in December 1796.
Yeah, let's kind of set the stage here. As usual, the British and French are at war with each other. The French have freed up some military forces with the end of the war with Spain and less fighting internally in the Vendée region. So, to me, it kind of seems like a far fetched scheme, but what is the game plan for the French in invading Ireland rather than England?
The first thing they want to do is just mess up England and Britain's war plans, and by any means possible. And an invasion of Ireland or England will do that. What had happened in November 1792, the French Republic had declared they would help any country, any people that were seeking to restore their liberty. They had made this great statement in the National Assembly, and this became a clarion call for would-be revolutionaries everywhere. Now, in reality, they actually quickly rolled back. They got very excited in the assembly and they made this declaration. And then the ministers were very quick to say, no, hold on. And especially going into 1793 with the Committee of Public Safety, Robespierre, they were very anti-foreign involvement in anything. So they were focused on internal security, internal stability, and they didn't want to actually start fomenting rebellions in other countries because they had enough to deal with back in France.
Mm-hmm.
So it's only really when England starts supporting the royalist rebels in the Vendée, and then also the Chouan rebels who are organizing an insurgency or a chouannerie to the north of the Vendée region. It's only when Britain is supporting these royalist rebels and causing huge devastation, and of course the French Republic represses it in a very brutal fashion. It's only at that point that they realize, right, okay, the exception is England. We won't get involved in foreign affairs apart from messing up England in any way possible, whether that's inciting rebellion in England itself, which they thought was possible. In reality, it really wasn't. Or inciting rebellion in Ireland, which was much more likely. And this was spearheaded by Lazare Carnot. He really hated England because of the actions in the Vendée, and he had been involved in the suppression of that, as had his talented generals, Lazare Hoche as well, and Henri Clark. Hoche will be very important in our story to come, but it really was a vengeance for this. And then, of course, the following year they landed in the Royal Navy landed Royalist troops at Quiberon Bay.
Yeah.
So they really are causing a lot of trouble for the French.
Yeah, and they're financing the Austrians and other allies in the first coalition to attack the French. You have the siege of Toulon. So, yeah, the French are probably looking at it like, well, they're over here trying to ruin our revolution. We're going to go over there and see what we can do to get them out of our lives.
Absolutely. And it's because I've looked at the original invasion plans in the Service Historique de la Défense, the French military archives in Paris, in the Vincennes Chateau. And they specifically say in them, this is in revenge for the Vendée. So they are not beating about the bush. It is absolutely about revenge. But of course, this worries their would-be Irish allies who are thinking, you're coming here to help us, right? Not just to mess up with England's plans.
Right. And yeah, we're going to talk about the leaders of the expedition. Now, Napoleon is around at this time, but he's in Italy. He is famous, but he's not leading the country yet. So he's not really involved in this expedition.
No. At this point, from 1795 into 1796, the Directory is in charge in France. So they are more open to foreign affairs expeditions, and Lazare Carnot being the main proponent of an attack on England or on Ireland. And they're looking for what can happen, and they make contact with Irish radicals who have come over to France and are trying to look for French aid in overthrowing British rule in Ireland.
Okay.
At this point, Britain has ruled Ireland, or England before that, has ruled since the late 12th century in various initial invasions to the east of Ireland, and then spreading out control over Ireland with an effectively conquering it during the Tudor period. And Ireland has been under English and then British control ever since. The mostly Catholic population are completely disenfranchised. They have no voting powers. They have very little civil liberties at this point, and the Protestant minority are in control through the form of the aristocracy and minor gentry. They're the ones who can sit in Parliament. They're the ones who can officially enlist in the army. And Ireland has its own parliament at this point as well. It has its own independent parliament, but still under the overall authority of George III, but it is an independent kingdom.
Okay. Well, for this venture, how many troops do the French prepare, and you mentioned the leaders kind of, but who's at the front lines leading the expedition from the boats?
So Lazare Carnot is the chief organizer of the expedition to begin with, and he meets with Theobald Wolfe Tone, who is one of the leaders of the United Irishmen. And this was a radical group of revolutionaries in Ireland formed of a mix initially of Anglican radicals such as Tone, he's Church of Ireland Protestant, and dissenters. So there'd be Presbyterians, Methodists, and so on. And they argue that we have to unite with Catholics, and that is how Ireland will get its independence, if we stop fighting amongst ourselves and unite and throw off British rule. So Tone travels to France to seek French aid, and he meets with the French Foreign Affairs Minister Delacroix and one of his agents, an Irishman, Madget. But he gets tired of talking to them. He doesn't think he's getting anywhere, so he actually bypasses them and goes straight to Carnot, one of the directors. And we know all this because Tone kept a fantastic diary of his time in Paris, and he's lobbying for French support, and he's being very enthusiastic and very optimistic in what he's telling the French. He's saying Ireland is definitely ready to rise in revolt. The French, at the same time, they're a bit suspicious. They're thinking, well, are you really? And the big argument is, what's going to happen first? Do the French launch an invasion first, and then the Irish will rise up? Or will the Irish rise up and the French will then come and help them? Of course, the French don't want to commit until they know the Irish will rise up, and it's the same the other way around for the Irish. So Carnot is organising this, and then he delegates a lot to one of his chief officers at the Bureau of Military Topography, Henri Clark. Mm-hmm. He's actually a second-generation Franco-Irish soldier, so his father had been born in Ireland. And then Lazare Hoche is one of the generals, is the leading general of the expedition. And as I said previously, he had been heavily involved in the Vendée. So he knows how to fight both a military campaign, but also an insurgency and counterinsurgency campaign.
Yeah, and future Marshal Grouchy, I believe, is his second in command.
He is indeed. They start assembling a very large invasion force of about 14 ships of the line, roughly about 14,500 troops, 31,000 weapons to give to the Irish that will hopefully rise in rebellion, and 5,000 royalist uniforms they had captured at Quiberon Bay. Because their hope was not only that the Irish people would rise in rebellion, but also the Irish soldiers in the Irish militia would also defect to their cause.
You know, I thought of something just now, and it kind of just hit me. It seems like a far-fetched idea because obviously we know how this campaign ends. But 20 years earlier, a little country named America asked the French for help to gain their independence, right? So this is maybe a similar thought.
Absolutely. And there had been a very long tradition of Franco-Irish connections, going back centuries, but in particular since the Battle of the Boyne in 1690 and then the Treaty of Limerick in 1691, when Irish Jacobite forces, Jacobite troops, had actually left Ireland and had emigrated to the Catholic armies of Europe, particularly France, Austria and Spain as well. So there'd been a long tradition of Irish people, in particular Irish soldiers, but always also Irish priests, Irish traders, going overseas to serve in the armies of France and other European countries. So there was this tradition anyway that Ireland had looked overseas. The Spanish had tried to help. The Spanish had sent troops in the 9 Years' War with Hugh O'Neill against the Elizabeth I forces. So there had been a tradition of foreign assistance to Irish.
Yeah, and I know there's Irish legions in Napoleon's army, and yeah, a long history of it. Well, all right, so we have this force prepared. We have 15,000 troops, 12 to 15,000. We have a number of ships of the line. What are some of the obstacles in the way besides the British Navy in this invasion?
So the British Navy is obviously a very capable force at this time. It's very well trained, very well staffed, and especially when you compare it with the French Navy, which had been gutted by the French Revolution. You had lost huge numbers of officers in particular in the French Navy, as had happened in the French Army, whereas you can quickly promote a sergeant or a captain to high command in the French Army when all you need to learn is new drills and you have gusto. You can't learn to be a naval officer that quickly. You need skills. You need mathematics, you need map reading, you need to know the weather, you need to have all these technical things, and they're immediately lost. So they are at a disadvantage to begin with.
Yep.
And also the fact that they're not committed completely to the plan. Hoche he's very committed because he thinks this is my time to shine. He's seeing his rival Napoleon gathering all these glories in Italy. So he's thinking, right, what do? I go off, and if I liberate Ireland and maybe cause a revolution, or at least really bad fighting in England as well, that's going to be my opportunity to shine. He's clashing heads with the naval commander of the expedition, Villaret-Joyeuse, to the point where he actually gets Joyeuse fired, because when he finds out that the admiral is more interested in a broader plan that the Directory had been thinking of, where the expedition would set sail, it would drop maybe about 5,000 troops in Ireland, but then it would continue on and attack British colonies in the West Indies. And at the same time, smaller raiding forces would go over and attack England. And these would be led by actually an American privateer or pirate, if you want to be a bit mean, Tate. And he was to lead what was known as La Légion Noire, the Black Legion. And it was basically a real mix of troops, French regulars, some exiled United Irishmen who wanted to come back, and convicts. So it was a real ragtag force. I mean, Wolfe Tone himself, he wasn't impressed when he saw them being assembled. So it's a real, the Directory are not committed to the actual expedition, and especially as 1796 goes on, their attention is drawn more and more to the east, to what Austria is doing and the fighting in Italy. They're getting less and less interested in a very risky gamble off to Ireland.
Well, already it sounds like there's too many chefs in the kitchen. Like with Napoleon's command, there was one guy who decided everything. But this, you have Hoche, you have Grouchy, you have the naval commander, you have the Irish contingent wanting their the Directory, Henri Clark with his ideas. So yeah, and then on top of all that, you have to requisition for all these troops. You got to have ammo and horses and guns and food, because they're going to be basically stranded there in Ireland, living off the land. So they have to have enough.
And what they were facing, while, as I said, there was a large force of militia in the country. There was roughly at the end of 1796, the Irish garrison was about 33,000 soldiers, of which about 18,000 were militia, which had been only formed in 1793. They were mostly Catholic as well, because Catholics had been just given the right to enlist in the army and bear arms, as well as vote. This was one of the things they had brought in to try and keep Catholics loyal when Britain and France first went to war, was to give some concessions to Catholics so they wouldn't seek French aid. That obviously hasn't worked. But there is a large militia, there's a large Catholic contingent within the militia, but the militia is untested. It hasn't fought any kind of battle. It's been used for small-scale policing work because Ireland doesn't have a police force at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's only a few regiments of regular infantry who would have had experience. There's quite a few fencible regiments, which are another kind of part-time or amateur soldiering force. And they have just brought in a new force as well called the Yeomanry, which is a mostly Protestant force. And it's very much a loyalist force because they had been unsure about the militia because it had been so Catholic. They decided we need a loyalist local defence force. And that's how the Yeomanry was formed. And it was very much about protecting local Protestant landowners and well-to-do people. So its focus was very much on loyalism as well. So it's a lot of these forces are untested in battle, but
Right.
they could be significant enough. So it's definitely looking like a fairly risky venture for the French.
Okay. Well, in December 1796, the attacking French fleet finally launched. How does the voyage go? Because it seems like December, wintertime, is a bad time to cross the channel.
Absolutely. It goes exceedingly bad. So the bad weather initially allows them to slip out of Brest Harbour unseen by the Royal Navy blockade. So the Royal Navy don't actually spot that they've left, even though it is, as I said, it's a large fleet. There's about 12 or 13 ships of the line and quite a few frigates and corvettes, and then a lot of transport ships as well. Hoche insists that they go as far south as possible to try and slip by the blockade, which, yes, that works, but it's also a very risky strait that they pass through. And one of the French ships of the line is actually wrecked as they're leaving. So even just from the get-go, that's a disaster. It's a bad omen, certainly. But the rest of them, they do get out into the sea, but then the bad weather, the fog, and some storms scatter the fleet. And in particular, the real disaster is Hoche and his naval commander. Their flagship is blown completely off course. And then they're chased by a Royal Navy ship or two as well. So they aren't involved at all for several days. Most of the fleet manage to find each other and they reach the coast of Cork on the 21st of December and they anchor in Bantry Bay, which is it's a very good harbour, and it's well protected. But even then, the bad weather means that they cannot land troops. And again, it's a kind of beggar's belief. Hoche hadn't told any of his commanders where the landing point would be. He had kept that to himself, and then he gets blown off course. So Grouchy, as you said, is his second in command. He's there with the naval second in command. And they're looking at each other thinking, well, what do we do? Do we try here? Do we go further up the west coast? They thought maybe we'll try Galway. Maybe we'll try to go up the Shannon River for a bit. Cork, obviously, is the closest place on the south coast to France. So it makes sense if you want a short voyage. But the further north they went would probably have been easier if they had landed. I think the official plans were for a Galway or further north. But of course, with Hoche out of the picture, they don't know what to do. So they just hang around in the ships. It's the worst storm since 1708. So there's nearly a century, about 88 years since they had as bad a storm. So it's actually very much like the Spanish Armada. England has once again been saved, as they said, by a Protestant wind.
And forgive me for saying, but it's Murphy's Law. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong. And, the one guy who knew where they were going to land was blown off course. So now they're all waiting around.
Yeah, exactly. And it's Tone, Wolfe Tone is actually, he's on one of the ships and he writes that he can see his homeland there, and he's brought, even with the fleet scattered, there were about 6,500 troops on those ships in the bay that could have landed. And Tone is there and he can see this shore. And he writes that he could just throw a ship's biscuit and hit the land. But the weather meant that he just could not. Or even if they had tried, they probably would have lost hundreds of people drowned in the violent sea. So it's so frustrating for them. And eventually Grouchy and his naval commander decide, right, we have to go. We need to cut our losses and sail back to France. So they sail on I think it's the 29th of December. and Hoche appears on the 30th. And all he can do is that there's a few ships remaining and they stay for a day and they have to sail back.
Still, you wonder if there was like an enterprising young Corsican general on this voyage. He probably would have said, well, we're landing, we're here. Like there's nothing would have stopped him.
Yeah, he might have, as I think, even if it had meant troops drowning in transport boats and in rowboats and so on, Napoleon probably would have pushed on, and it could have been a quite a different situation.
Yeah. What were the British preparations for this? You mentioned there's militia in Ireland. I mean, they probably had some intelligence because they saw the attack fleet sitting there in Brest. But what were their preparations for?
The British authorities in Ireland had a wide network of spies, and they had infiltrated the United Irish movement, but the United Irishmen they were very good at hiding what they were doing because they were quite often quite disorganized. They had been a political group that had been outlawed in 1794 and driven underground. And since then, they had been very keen to try and keep their connections with France as secret as possible. So when Wolfe Tone, he doesn't go directly to France. He had gone to America first and had then entered France as an American citizen, John Smith. So he'd gone under an alias to try and hide his intentions. The British definitely knew that something was happening. They definitely knew an invasion force was coming. They just hadn't expected it to sail out of port in December 1796. So the main Royal Navy force doesn't realise what has happened until the French are actually sailing home again. Mm. They are caught completely flat-footed because of the bad weather and just the secrecy that had been maintained at this time. A lot of the spies were in Ireland. So and this was again, Tone had complained that nobody had gone back to Ireland. He hadn't heard from anyone in Ireland, but that actually helped the mission, because if he had been in regular contact or sending letters back to Ireland, they would have been intercepted probably, and they would have known. So they don't know exactly where it is, and they're reluctant to try and, because Ireland has a very long coastline, and and so much of the military is tied up in policing the local population. They don't really know where they can go and try and work out, okay, right, if they land in the west, we need to go this way and so on. So when the fleet appears in Bantry Bay, there is a mad panic in Dublin Castle, the seat of the Lord Lieutenant, and there is actually a very small military force in Cork. There's only a couple of thousand troops down there. So if the French had landed, they would have found it very easy to march across the southern part of the country, at least. So the British send the troops down to the south coast in this terrible weather, and they again, to try and, because they're so embarrassed that they've been caught flat-footed, they afterwards try and make it really inspiring that all these loyal lawyers and businessmen and good, honest Protestant Irish and loyal Catholic as well, that all these loyal Irishmen rallied together and marched down to see off the French, and didn't they do a great job? When in reality it had been a very embarrassing affair.
Well, as you mentioned, yeah, the attacking fleet retreats back to the French coast after heavy damage from storms. Do you think if they had landed even 6,000 troops or 10,000 troops, that the plan might have worked?
It's one, as I said, one of those great what ifs of Irish history. I think to begin with, yes, they would have met with a lot of success. They would have had, even with the militia and the other forces, they would probably have had the edge on the battlefield against them, because a lot of these troops the French troops would have been seasoned troops. Some of them were new as well, but some of them would have experienced fighting in the Vendée, and therefore they would have been well used to fighting in irregular terrain. Ireland was very boggy. The roads were very poor. It wasn't like the big open battlefields of Europe. It would have been a very different kind of battle, a different type of campaign, but it wouldn't have lasted, because in the end, France wasn't that interested in maintaining an Irish republic as they were in just distracting the British, causing problems for them. And as happened, a large number of British troops do get sent over to Ireland, and more. If the French had landed, even more would have been sent over, and eventually those French troops would have been caught and defeated.
I agree. I think it would have been like an Egyptian campaign situation where, they landed, they maybe won a few battles, but then the British Navy would have sealed it off and there would be no more reinforcements.
Yes, that would be exactly it, yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the final damage report or loss to the French military. Doesn't look good, does it?
No, it's and again, a lot of that is due to either just the bad weather. As I said, one ship of the line is lost as they're leaving port, and another ship of the line is caught in a skirmish with the Royal Navy and is driven aground, and with the loss of most of its crew, nearly 1,000 just on that ship alone. So that's probably the largest single loss of life. But combined with the other troops that are lost on smaller ships that are destroyed, but most of them are just captured.
Yep.
Or they're lost to bad weather. It's roughly 2,000 to 3,000 casualties overall. So it's very embarrassing for the French. It's extremely frustrating for Hoche, who had thought he would get there, and he starts to lash out at everyone who he can. Then he's quickly told, right, you have to go elsewhere now. You're needed elsewhere. So he's posted off to the army of the Sambre and Meuse. Yep. So he's quickly sent elsewhere because, as I said, France is looking elsewhere. And Wolfe Tone, he follows Hoche because Tone doesn't have any military experience, but he's now bilingual. He can speak French, he can speak English. He's very useful. He's intelligent. He's a lawyer. And so he's actually becomes a staff officer with Hoche. But by September 97, Hoche dies. He was only 29 when he died. He is so young. All these young, the young romantics, as the kind of the later groups will become. But Tone, again, the guy has guts. He approaches Talleyrand and asks him to be put on the staff. Talleyrand introduces him to Berthier.
Yep.
Berthier introduces him to Desailly, and Desailly gets him a meeting at Josephine's house with the man himself. At this point, of course, he's Bonaparte. He's not Napoleon yet.
Right.
And he says, "Oh, I really want to be on your staff. I want to help invade England and Ireland, liberate Ireland." And he said, "I'm only sorry that I don't have any military experience." And according to Tone's diary, and Napoleon says, "Well, you're brave. That's enough, isn't it?" But Tone, even he is able to kind of write in his diary afterwards, "Isn't it droll? I've just met the most famous man in Europe." Mm-hmm. So even then, he's realizing that he's meeting these great cast of characters. So he's appointed to the staff, but of the Army of England. But of course, then in early 1798, Napoleon starts to look east. He realizes this is where glory can happen. We'll go east, go to the Mediterranean, and go to Egypt. So Tone is out of a job again.
Well, and just to wrap up on the 1796 invasion, it's a total failure for sure. But it kind of proved one thing, that the French Navy, although depleted and they don't have the officers that they used to, they can leave port and launch an expedition like they do in Egypt, like you said, in 1798. And then there's another invasion in 1798 and an Irish rebellion that same year. Was that kind of inspired by the failed 1796 invasion?
Yes, very much so. It had shown that it had happened before, and it was only bad weather had thwarted the French plans. So in the aftermath, the British government in Ireland are very embarrassed that this had almost happened. So they enact a lot of draconian laws in Ireland in 1797 to try and suppress the United Irishmen. And kind of with a grim irony, they carry out the actions that the French had been planning on carrying out to destroy England. Britain is doing it in Ireland. The only part of the plan that had gone ahead was the small invasion force under Tate and his Black Legion in England. It had happened just in Fishguard. The plan had been to attack Bristol, but they couldn't get there. So they land in February 1797 and they loot and raid a little bit. And then they're surrounded by smaller number of militiamen, and they actually surrender. The story goes that they mistook Welsh women in their red shawls as redcoats.
Mm.
But I think that there's other people can put maybe some of those myths to rest. I'm not an expert on that particular episode, but it causes a lot of repression in Ireland. And one of the generals, Knox, he actually says to his superior commanding officer, when talking about repression in the Ulster region in the north of Ireland, he actually says, "I look at Ulster to be a la Vendée." And he says that the only way we can suppress these people is to carry out the same actions that the French Republic had carried out in the Vendée region.
Yeah.
So it's that extreme house burning, torture, arrest, suspension of habeas corpus, all of that to try and quash the rebellion, quash the movement. But at the same time, the near miss for the British, it was a near success for the United Irishmen. So this actually, it's a PR success for them. Yes, the French hadn't landed, but they actually, it receives a massive swell in numbers. The United Irishmen after 1796. It provokes harsh reprisals on one hand, but it also really inspires a lot of them the next time, and it will. And of course, Tone is back in France lobbying for more support. And as you said, eventually an Irish rebellion does break out in the summer of 1798. And towards the end of that summer, Tone will eventually convince the French to send over troops. Not as many this time, but he does send them over.
It's definitely a time of troubles, just that whole period for the Irish. But again, it gives the idea that it can be done. So in 1804, Napoleon is again, off the coast of England, looking across the Channel. Do you think? I mean, he did a lot of work. He made a lot of landing crafts. Do you think he was going to invade England, and just if it weren't for the Austrians attacking, he would have? Or what do you think about his 1804 campaign?
Again, that's another great what if moments. He would have seen the French expedition that had happened in 1798 had led to initial success before eventual defeat, as we had theorized for 1796. So he had seen that seaborne invasions can have a great start, but it's all about sustaining them. And Napoleon, as much as he was, had the flair of, as a battlefield general, he knew about logistics. He knew about supply lines as well. So I think he probably, when he was feeling a bit more confident, he might have thought, yes, we can do this. But then when he was in more a pragmatic mode, he might have thought, no, this is not the right time. Maybe when everyone's defeated on the continent. Of course, he had the money as well with the Louisiana Purchase. But I think at the end of the day, he probably would have seen the British build-up of defences, coastal defences, the Martello Towers, all along the coast of Britain and of Ireland as well. They were quite well defended, especially the key ports, the key towns and so on, and potential landing places. Again, he probably thought the gamble maybe wasn't worth it. At times, of course, Napoleon, he wasn't as anti-English at times as some of the other leaders had been. So he probably thought, maybe I can work with Britain against my foes, against the Prussians, against the Austrians. But I think at the end of the day, he probably did realize it would be useful, but it isn't essential. And what my focus needs to be on the continent.
And I think you just hit upon something. My final question is going to be, what is the legacy of the 1796 invasion? But maybe it was a wake-up call to not only the coastal fortifications, but the British Navy. Like, look, we can't have this happen again where they just sneak out and attack Ireland without us knowing about it. So maybe in 1804, they have that strict blockade where nobody's coming across the channel. And the 1796 invasion maybe thwarted Napoleon in 1804 as a legacy.
Yes, yeah, that's quite possible. That's definitely a contributing factor. And as I said, for Ireland, it had provoked great reprisals, but also inspired United Irishmen to eventually rise in 1798, although they were eventually defeated. And then it also inspires, they don't give up completely. There's another attempted rising in 1803 by Robert Emmet, but that's a much smaller affair, and just focusing in on Dublin. But again, they had hoped, Emmet had gone over to France as well, and he had definitely met with Talleyrand, and maybe he might have met with with Napoleon as well. So there was a continued Franco-Irish coordination to try and overthrow British control in Ireland. And as you mentioned, the Irish legions are set up by Napoleon as well. Yep. In the Grande Armée, mostly Irish officers, and then just a mix of other nationalities in the rank and file.
What were Tone's later years like? I mean, this must have been a huge disappointment to him.
He really was completely devastated, and his diary is very melancholic. Again, he's the young romantic. This period now of sensibility, and he remains one of the kind of tragic figures of Irish history as a result, because he takes part in the 1798 expedition under General Humbert to Ireland. Again, fittingly, he's on the ship the Hoche, which takes part in a battle off the coast of Donegal. And Tone, he was a commissioned officer. He had been commissioned into the French army, and he had been very proud of his uniform. He's almost a schoolboy in his diaries when he's talking about putting on the uniform, and he's all excited in 1796 when he initially gets his commission. But he actually does command during that skirmish in 1798. So he finally had his battle, the one that he had confessed he didn't have to Napoleon. He finally got his battle before the ship is captured. And again, just the tragedy continues. He wants to be court-martialed as a French officer. He is apprehended in French uniform, but legally as a British subject, an Irish subject of the British Crown, he is also a traitor. So they refuse his request to be shot as a soldier, and they sentence him to be hung. And he cheats the hangman's noose by committing suicide in prison in Dublin, and he dies on the 19th of November in 1798. So his life comes to a tragic end, but he then becomes a martyr for Irish republicanism in the immediate years, inspiring others, and then in the decades and centuries to come. He is seen as the father of Irish republicanism as a result.
Interesting. I'm so glad you shared all that with us. I didn't know all that history. It's very good stuff. Again, if you want to learn more about Dr. Ciaran McDonnell, you can check out his Weebly website, or he has a number of articles that he's written. You can find those online as well. And Ciaran, that was fabulous. Thank you so much, sir.
That's great. Thank you very much, John. And if anyone wants to follow me on social media, you can find me on Blue Sky, Dr. Ciaran McDonnell.
Yeah, he has a great Blue Sky account, which I follow, and I recommend you check it out over there. And we'll have him back on soon. This is fantastic.
That's great. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ciaran.